Hey everybody, this is Geneva of Geneva's Closet Talk Show. Please make sure you like and share this video and subscribe to Geneva's Closet if you haven't already done so right here on YouTube. And you can follow me on Facebook at Geneva's Closet. And you can email me at genevascloset22@gmail.com. Now, let's get into the news. Hey everybody, this is Geneva of Geneva's Closet Talk Show, and we are about to read this lawsuit with Diddy and Rodney Jones like it's a book. Now check this out. So I know you heard about this lawsuit with Diddy. You know, P. Diddy, Diddy Love, whatever. With this man, Rodney Jones, a.k.a. Lil Rod. And he's on Instagram as Lil Rod Made It. Well, on February 5th, he started a GoFundMe asking for $50,000 because he said that he needed help with his legal fees because he was trying to sue Diddy. Then 2 days later, on February 7th, 2024, he came on his Instagram page and said that he was trying to sue Diddy because he helped Diddy with some music on his album, the Love album, because, you know, Lil Rod is a music producer, and Diddy hadn't paid him. A day later, on February 8th, he came back on his Instagram social media page talking about that he wasn't doing any more music appearances because he had been threatened. He was scared for his life and his family life and all of this type of stuff. And then on February 26th, he went inside the United States Federal Court, Southern District of New York, to sue Diddy. Warning, warning, warning. Just want to let you know that this reading will contain some highly graphic information. You know, like some sex and some drugs and all of that type of stuff. So if you're not ready for all of that, then don't check this out.
I apologize to anyone this video may be embarrassing to. Let's just jump right into it. Some of you may know me or may not. I'm a music producer who's a writer and musician. Different genres. I started in the gospel and jazz and R&B and worked my way over to the hip hop side. I've been working on an album. I took a year off straight working on this album. That album is the Love album, Off the Grid by Diddy. And it's Grammy nominated right now as we speak. I should be celebrating, but the truth is I'm not. Taking this album on has required so much time, months and at a time, 16 hours to 24 hours a day. Sometimes, Diddy will request certain works to be done and tell us don't go to sleep until it's done. And the truth is we'll be up for days trying to accomplish that. I've tried to get my business straight with them on this album, but the truth is they're not playing fair. They hit me on below the belt on so many situations, just dealing with this. The contract that they give me and the offer that they gave me was just disgusting. The producer fee, pennies, and on top of that, these guys are trying to steal my publishing. I can't go for that, so I'm fighting back. He's a fighter, but I'm going to put in this fight. I got to do it for myself, my rights, and most importantly, my kids. Taking my publishing or stealing it I'm not going to let that happen. Not going to let that happen. Again, this is one of those projects that took so much time from me. I missed holidays with my family, just out working on this album. At what point I was running around with the hard drives, the computer, just to run the ball on this album, to finish the production on it, and make sure that this album came to, a good project with good vibes, just where it is right now. And just to be offered little to no participation in this is highly disrespectful. I won't be that guy 20, 30 years from now, looking back saying, I wish I'd done this. I'm going to do this now. Doing this situation is not easy. Taking Puff to court, suing him is not easy. I don't have the monies that it's going to take to fight him in court. So I'm just asking, if you're in support, please, the link is in my bio to my GoFundMe. The money will go towards my attorney fees and to just make sure I'm keeping my head above water. during the process. I really appreciate this. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Until further notice, I will not be performing at any gigs or anything like that. For security reasons, my family, friends, and everyone close to me just feels like there's a lot of potential threats, and everybody's just telling me what he's allegedly capable of, and it's very scary for myself, and it has me worried about my kids, and just sleeping with anxiety and different things like that. So just moving forward, just want to pause on everything until we know that it's clear and safe for me to come back outside of work. I appreciate you all for your love and support, and everybody that knows me, etc. Thank you so much. Love.
Jurisdiction and venue. This court has personal jurisdiction over the defendants under and consistent with the constitutional requirements of due process, in that the defendants, acting directly or through his agents or apparent agents, committed one or more of the following: the transaction of any business within the state, the making of any contract within the state, the commission of a tortious act within this district, and the ownership, use, or possession of any real estate in this state. From September 2022 to the date of this filing, defendants have consistently and purposefully availed themselves of the privilege of conducting activities within New York, thus invoking the benefits and protections of New York law. In return for these benefits and protections, defendants must submit to the burdens of litigation in New York. This litigation arises from or relates to the tortious activities defendants visited upon defendants in the states of New York, California, Florida, and the United States Virgin Island. This tortious conduct violated United States federal RICO laws. Requiring defendants to litigate these claims in this district does not offend traditional notions of fair play and substantial justice. Plaintiff's claim arises from some conduct occurring by defendants in New York. Parties. Plaintiff Rodney Jones is an American artist and music producer. Mr. Jones resides in the states of New York and California. Defendant Sean Combs is a rapper and record executive popularly known by his stage names Puff Daddy, Puffy, P. Diddy, Diddy, Brother Love, or Love. Mr. Combs came to fame in the early 1990s with his record label Bad Boy Records. He rose to prominence in the music and entertainment industry over the decades and is regularly referred to as a hip-hop mogul. Mr. Combs resides at blah blah blah, Beverly Hills, California. Defendant Justin Dior Combs is the son of Mr. Combs and Misa Hilton. Combs was born on December 30th, 1993. Defendant Lucian Charles, if I'm saying that correctly, is the CEO of Defendant Universal Music Group. Defendant Ethiopia Habertamariam, if I'm saying that correctly, is the former CEO of Defendant Motown Records, the parent company of Defendant Love Records. Defendant Christina Coram, if I'm saying that correctly, is the chief of staff to Sean Diddy Combs, Combs Global Enterprises. Rodney Jones is also suing Chalice Recording Studio, Motown Records, Universal Music Group, Love Records, and Comb Enterprises. Rodney Lil Rod Jones. Rodney Lil Rod Jones Jr. is from the Windy City, Chi-Town. He was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. Mr. Jones is the second oldest and fourth child out of 9 siblings. Mr. Jones comes from a long line of gospel music influencers. Mr. Jones started playing instruments at the age of 5. He began playing drums in church, and at the age of 13, he picked up playing the guitar. From 13 to present day, Mr. Jones has taught himself how to play over 13 instruments. Mr. Jones is considered a musical prodigy. His talents have led him to produce and create a commercial marketplace for music that has been recorded by some of the most prestigious and highly acclaimed artists in music history. Throughout the duration of his career, Mr. Jones has worked the South Side of Chicago music scene, playing with the following legendary greats: Georgia Mass Choir, Donald Lawrence, the Clark Sisters, and the Smokey Norfolk. On or about August 2022, Mr. Jones received a call from Mr. Combs requesting that he produce several songs on a rhythm and blues album titled The Love Album, Off the Grid. The Love Album. Mr. Jones agreed, and his life has been detrimentally impacted ever since. Summary of events. From September 2022 to November 2023, Mr. Jones produced 9 songs on Mr. Combs' Love album. Mr. Jones lived with Mr. Combs for months at a time, spending holidays, birthdays, and missing major family events. Mr. Jones resided at Mr. Combs' residence located in Los Angeles, California, New York City, and Miami, Florida. Mr. Jones also spent several weeks on a yacht rented by Mr. Combs in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Throughout this time with Mr. Combs, Mr. Jones witnessed, experienced, and endured many things that went far beyond his role as a producer on the Love album. The claims raised in this complaint have been corroborated through witness statements, video, audio recordings, and images that Mr. Jones has in his possession. Mr. Combs required Mr. Jones to record him constantly. On several occasions, Mr. Combs took Mr. Jones' cell phone and began recording himself. As a result, Mr. Jones has secured hundreds of hours of footage and audio recordings of Mr. Combs, his staff, and his guests engaging in serious illegal activity. Mr. Jones has secured irrefutable evidence of the acquisition, use, and distribution of ecstasy, cocaine, GHB, ketamine, marijuana, and mushrooms, the displaying and distribution of unregistered illegal firearms, Mr. Combs providing laced alcoholic beverages to minors and sex workers at his homes in California, New York, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and Florida. Mr. Combs' Chief of Staff, Christina, instructing her staff to retrieve drugs so she can provide it to Mr. Combs for his consumption. Christian Combs, drugging and sexually assaulting a woman. Mr. Combs detailing how he planned to leverage his relationship with Bishop T.D. Jakes to soften the impact on his public image of Cassie Ventura's lawsuit. Young Miami's cousin and or assistant sexually assaulting Mr. Jones. Actor Cuba Gooding Jr. sexually harassing and assaulting Mr. Jones. Rapper Redacted on Mr. Combs' yacht consorting with underage girls, sex workers, and R&B singer Redacted in Mr. Combs' Los Angeles home consorting with underage girls and sex workers. Chalice Recording Studios shooting. On or about September 12, 2022, Mr. Combs held a writers and producers camp at Chalice Recording Studio in Los Angeles, California. Present at this camp were Diddy, his son Justin Combs, and Justin's friend named G. Now, Mr. G is a 30-year-old tall African-American male, okay? In addition to these individuals, other musicians were present at this camp. Now, the writer of this court filing has spoken to several musicians who attended the camp. One evening during this camp, Mr. Combs, his son Justin, and G were in a heated conversation. That conversation was moved out of the studio and into a restroom adjacent to where Mr. Jones was sitting. Mr. Jones was approximately about 2 feet away from the bathroom when gunshots rang out. Mr. Jones recalls hearing multiple gunshots. He immediately went into a state of shock and feared that he would be shot next. Mr. Jones genuinely believed that he would be shot through the door due to how close he was. After the shooting ended, a crowd gathered around the restroom. When the door finally opened, Diddy and his son, Justin, exited. But Mr. G was laying on the restroom floor in a fetal position, holding his stomach and bleeding out of his leg-hip area. Everyone just stood around looking at Mr. G. Frustrated about a lack of aid to G, Mr. Jones dropped everything, ran to Mr. G, and immediately began placing pressure on his gunshot wound to his stomach. As he was applying pressure on his stomach, Mr. Jones realized that G was gushing blood from another area near his leg hip. So he decided to lift G and placed him to sit him on the toilet. Mr. Jones asked the crowd to call the ambulance. Mr. Jones lifted G and brought him to the ambulance at the studio's front. Now, at this time, Mr. Combs and Justin disappeared to another part of the studio. Mr. Combs gave strict instructions to inform the police that he had nothing to do with the shooting. He also forced Mr. Jones to lie to the police by telling them that G was shot standing outside the studio by a drive-by assailant. Mr. Jones has several corroborating witnesses who spoke with this writer anonymously due to the fear of retaliation from Mr. Combs. They have agreed to speak publicly when subpoenaed. Mr. Jones has the clothing he wore that day and believes it may still have the stains and DNA of G's blood. The following are screenshots of the aftermath of the restroom where G was shot by either Mr. Combs or Justin Combs. Clearly, G was not shot outside of the studio as Mr. Combs instructed his team to report to law enforcement. Mr. Combs and defendants, LR, MR, UMG, and CRS, provided private security for the writers' camp at defendant CRS. The security was porous and lackluster at best. The fact that either Mr. Combs and Justin Combs were allowed to enter CRS with guns and those guns were not confiscated by security is a clear breach of duty by Mr. Combs' defendants, LR, MR, and UMG, to protect Mr. Jones and the other attendees of this writer's camp. As a result of the shooting, Mr. Jones is severely traumatized. Mr. Jones now suffers from PTSD, severe anxiety, depression, and insomnia. Mr. Jones was sexually harassed and assaulted by Mr. Combs. Throughout his time living with Mr. Combs, Mr. Jones was the victim of constant unsolicited and unauthorized groping and touching of his anus by Mr. Combs. These events took place in LA, New York, Florida, and the United States Virgin Islands. In addition to the unsolicited and unauthorized touching, Mr. Jones was forced by Mr. Combs to work in Mr. Combs' bathroom as Mr. Combs walked around naked and showered in a clear glass enclosure. As a heterosexual Christian man, Mr. Jones was uncomfortable with Mr. Combs' advances and expressed his discomfort to Mr. Combs' chief of staff, Christina. Christina responded to Mr. Jones' complaint with, "You know, shine will be shine." Christina also attempted to downplay Mr. Combs' groping of Mr. Jones' anus and genitals as friendly horseplay, stating that those acts were Mr. Combs' way of showing that he likes you, Mr. Jones. Despite these assurances, on several occasions when Mr. Combs began to undress and walk around his house naked, Christina would say, "Okay, I am leaving now," and she would disappear. Christina's hypocrisy is breathtaking at best or enabling at worst. Mr. Jones believes that Christina aided and abetted Mr. Combs' sexual assault of him and was working with Mr. Combs to groom him into accepting a homosexual relationship. Through these sexually deviant acts, one would say Mr. Combs has a pattern and practice of engaging in such activity. This ongoing conduct shows that Mr. Combs cannot be rehabilitated. Mr. Combs attempted to groom Mr. Jones into engaging in gay sex. Mr. Combs was aware that Mr. Jones looked up to and idolized music producer Stephen Aaron Jordan, a.k.a. StevieJ. StevieJ is best known to a lot of people for his role on Love and Hip Hop Atlanta. StevieJ is an American DJ, record producer, and television personality. StevieJ was part of the Bad Boy Records production team, The Hitmen. In 1997, StevieJ won a Grammy Award for his work on Puff Daddy's debut album. Throughout the 1990s, StevieJ produced for several artists, including Mariah Carey, Tevin Campbell, The Notorious B.I.G., 112, Jodeci, Faith Evans, Jay-Z, and Eve. StevieJ was one of the producers on the Love album. Mr. Combs used access to StevieJ and his knowledge of Mr. Combs' admiration of StevieJ to groom and entice Mr. Jones to engage in homosexuality. Mr. Combs went so far as to share a video of StevieJ anally penetrating a Caucasian male without a condom. This was done to ease Mr. Jones' anxiety concerning homosexuality. According to Mr. Combs, this is a normal practice in the music industry. Look, even StevieJ is doing it. Mr. Combs informed Mr. Jones that he had engaged in sexual intercourse himself with the same redacted rapper that I mentioned earlier and the same redacted R&B singer that I mentioned earlier and StevieJ. Mr. Combs promised to make sure that Mr. Jones wins Producer of the Year at the Grammys if he engaged in homosexuality. Now, before I finish reading the rest of this court document, let me get to these footnotes that was included in here. Thank you for the footnotes. Remember earlier I was reading and I said that a rapper and an R&B singer redacted that the rapper on Mr. Combs' yacht was consorting with underage girls, sex workers, and there was an R&B singer redacted in Mr. Combs' Los Angeles home that was consorting with underage girls and sex workers. And remember, I just said right now that there is a rapper and an R&B singer that Diddy admitted to having sex with, including StevieJ. Well, when you get to the little footnotes, it says that the rapper is a Philadelphia rapper who dated Nicki Minaj. So we all know that that is Meek Mills. And it says that the R&B singer performed at the Super Bowl and had a successful Vegas residency. So we all know that that is Usher. Then it says, too, this writer is in possession of the video and will provide a copy to the court. I guess that's the video of StevieJ and alleged man doing the anally stuff. Yeah. Thanksgiving 2022, Mr. Jones is sexually assaulted by young Miami's cousin. On Thanksgiving Day 2022, Mr. Jones was in Mr. Combs' house located in Miami, Florida. Young Miami and her female cousin were also present. Mr. Combs was intoxicated and offered cocaine to Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones rejected him and proceeded to walk to the restroom. While using the restroom, young Miami's cousin burst into the bathroom and began groping Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones believes that Mr. Combs sent her in there to sexually assault Mr. Jones. As she entered the bathroom, she dropped to her knees and began performing oral sex on Mr. Jones' exposed penis. Mr. Jones pushed her away and exited the bathroom. Young Miami's cousin did not accept Mr. Jones' rejection as she proceeded to follow Mr. Jones out of the bathroom. She started undressing and attempted to straddle him and have sex with him in the presence of Mr. Combs and his staff. Once again, Mr. Jones pushed her off. The following are images of the video of young Miami, her cousin, Mr. Jones, and Mr. Combs on Thanksgiving Day. Trafficking and Victims Protection Act. Throughout his time with Mr. Combs, Mr. Jones was transported from California to New York, Florida, and the United States Virgin Islands. During this time, Mr. Jones was forced to solicit sex workers and perform sex acts to the pleasure of Mr. Combs. On or about February 4th, 2023, Mr. Combs forced Mr. Jones to bring prostitutes and workers back to his home in Miami, Florida. The sex workers that Mr. Combs forced Mr. Jones to bring back to his home. On or about February 2nd, 2023, incident. Mr. Jones believes Mr. Combs drugged him. Mr. Jones recalls waking up naked, dizzy, and confused. He was in bed with two sex workers and Mr. Combs. He also recalls aimlessly wandering around the house with no clothes on. Sex workers in Mr. Jones' bed the morning after being drugged. On another occasion in Miami, Florida, on Thanksgiving night of 2022, Mr. Combs asked Mr. Jones and DeForest Taylor to enter the studio bathroom. He asked them for a $100 bill because he wanted them to do cocaine with him. Mr. Jones was scared, but luckily he didn't have a $100 bill. So Mr. Combs waited a little later to do coke with young Miami. Later that evening, he required Mr. Jones to solicit workers from Booby Trap on the River located in Miami, Florida. Mr. Jones did so, and Mr. Combs forced him to engage in unsolicited sex acts with these workers. Booby Trap on the River. As part of Mr. Jones' sex worker recruitment tools, Mr. Combs provided Mr. Jones with an exclusive bad boy baseball cap and required him to wear it to Booby Trap on the River as a signal to any sex worker he approached that Mr. Combs was in town and had sent Mr. Jones to recruit them. Mr. Jones had no desire to visit Booby Trap on the River. Mr. Jones had no desire to solicit sex workers from Booby Trap on the River. Mr. Combs used his power and influence to intimidate and force Mr. Jones into soliciting sex workers from Booby Trap on the River. As detailed below, Mr. Combs used many tactics to maintain dominion and control of Mr. Jones. Apparently, these workers were accustomed to servicing Mr. Combs and would know that he is in town by the sight of the bad boy's baseball cap. The following are Instagram profiles of two of the sex workers that Mr. Combs required Mr. Jones to solicit and have sex with at his home in Miami, Florida. Mr. Jones had no desire to solicit and or have sex with the individuals in the previous paragraph. Mr. Combs used his power and influence to intimidate and force Mr. Jones into soliciting and sleeping with these women. The following is the phone number of another sex worker that Mr. Combs required Mr. Jones to solicit and perform sex acts with at his home in Miami, Florida. Mr. Combs used many tactics to maintain dominion and control of Mr. Jones. He promised him a Grammy for Producer of the Year for the Love album. He offered him $250,000 to purchase all the instruments he wanted. He promised him ownership of his $20 million property, One Star Island in Miami, Florida. He promised access to record label executives like defendants Lucian Charles Grange, if I'm saying that correctly, and Ethiopia. Mr. Combs would often switch up his approach. He would go from promising Mr. Jones the world to threatening Mr. Jones with physical harm. Mr. Combs threatened to eat Mr. Jones' face and inform Mr. Jones that he is willing to kill his mother, Janice Combs, if he must in order to get what he wants, so he wouldn't think twice to harm Mr. Jones. Mr. Combs and Justin Combs solicits, drugs, and engages in illicit sex acts with minors and sex workers. On or about July 2nd, 2023, in California, Mr. Combs had a listening party at his home. Present at the party was a R&B artist, redacted, Justin Combs, sex workers, and some underage girls. The event began at 7 p.m. Mr. Combs requested female sex workers and required Mr. Jones to solicit them. An hour later, several sex workers appeared. In addition to sex workers, there were at least 5 women in the crowd that were under the age of 16. Mr. Combs forced all the women to drink Lace de Leon liquor. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs laced the liquor with ecstasy. Mr. Combs did not check the identification of any of these underage girls. The presence of these underage women made Mr. Jones feel uncomfortable. He attempted to leave, and Mr. Combs forced him to stay. Mr. Combs went so far as to take Mr. Jones' car keys to prevent him from leaving. After being forced to drink Lace de Leon shots, Mr. Jones began feeling lightheaded and recalls passing out and waking up at 4 a.m. the following morning naked with a sex worker sleeping next to him. Mr. Combs attempts to pass off Mr. Jones to Cuba Gooding Jr. Mr. Jones believes that Mr. Combs was grooming him to pass him off to his friends. The fear became reality when Mr. Combs introduced Mr. Jones to Cuba Gooding Jr. while they were on Mr. Combs' yacht. During the introduction, Mr. Combs suggested that Cuba get to know Mr. Jones better. He then left them alone in a makeshift studio on the yacht. As evidenced by a video of which screenshots are included, Cuba Gooding Jr. began touching, groping, and fondling Mr. Jones' legs, his upper inner thighs near his groin, the small of his back near his buttocks and his shoulders. Mr. Jones was extremely uncomfortable and proceeded to lean away from Cuba Gooding Jr. He rejected his advances, and Mr. Cuba Gooding Jr. did not stop until Mr. Jones forcibly pushed him away. The following is a screenshot of that encounter with Cuba Gooding Jr. The Love album. Throughout his time with Mr. Combs, Mr. Jones was under an implied work-for-hire agreement. He was not compensated for his time living with Mr. Combs or for the songs he produced. As evidence, he was listed as a producer for the following songs on the Love album's final release: Deliver Me, Stay Part 1, Reaching, What's Love, Stay a While, Moments, Need Somebody, Homecoming, and Tough Love. Mr. Combs and defendants LR, MR, UMG all benefited from Mr. Jones' work product. They failed to compensate Mr. Jones for his work. As a result, Mr. Combs and defendants LR, MR, UMG were all unjustly enriched at the expense of Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones attempted to work with Mr. Combs to secure his publishing and royalty rights for the work he completed on the Love album. Mr. Combs only offered Mr. Jones $29,000 for 13 months, thousands of hours of work, and 9 songs that made it to the Love album. Ironically, Mr. Jones was willing to take $50,000, his publishing and royalties. Mr. Combs' self-serving greed would not allow him to pay Mr. Jones an additional $21,000. Mr. Combs' deceptive business practices became so bad that Mr. Jones was left with no choice other than to make a public plea on social media for Mr. Combs to pay him for his work. After publicly requesting that Mr. Combs do the right thing and pay him fairly, Mr. Jones received an onslaught of threatening messages from StevieJ and Love Records A&R DeForest Taylor. Mr. Combs used his power and influence to threaten and intimidate Mr. Jones. According to Mr. Jones, Mr. Combs is very forceful and demanding. Mr. Combs does not take no for an answer and would often threaten to inflict bodily harm on Mr. Jones if Mr. Jones did not comply with his demands. As detailed above, Mr. Combs threatened to eat Mr. Jones' face. On another occasion, while standing in Mr. Combs' bedroom, Mr. Jones was forced to watch as Mr. Combs displayed his guns and bragged about getting away with shooting people. Mr. Combs shared that he was responsible for the shooting in the nightclub in New York City with rapper Shine. He shared that artist and Mr. Combs' girlfriend at the time, Jennifer Lopez, aka J-Lo, carried the gun into the club for him and passed him the gun after he got into an altercation with another individual. The shooting in Chalice recording studio confirmed Mr. Combs' statement. These statements reinforced Mr. Jones' fear of Mr. Combs and strengthened Mr. Combs' dominion and control of Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones was terrified of Mr. Combs. He felt like he could not tell him no. Mr. Combs consistently made it clear that he has immense power in the music industry and with law enforcement. Mr. Combs made it clear that his head of security, Fahim Muhammad, Mr. Muhammad, had the power to make people and problems disappear. Mr. Combs instructs his staff to always contact Mr. Muhammad if they are pulled over by the police in Miami or California. Upon information and belief, Mr. Muhammad spoke with the LAPD after G was shot at the Chalice recording studio. The LAPD was in CRS and witnessed the blood in the restroom, and they went with the bogus claim that the shooting of Mr. G occurred outside of the studio. This was all thanks to Mr. Muhammad's connection with law enforcement. Mr. Jones had no reason to disbelieve Mr. Combs, as he had seen firsthand through the shooting of G and the subsequent silence of the LAPD and the media that Mr. Combs indeed had the power to harm him. The LAPD spent hours in CRS after the shooting of G, yet there were no arrests. Mr. Jones witnessed the LAPD in the restroom, yet no arrests were made. The morning after the shooting, Mr. Jones, several others arrived at CRS and G's blood was still on the floor of the restroom, and Mr. Combs hired a cleanup crew to clean it up. Defendants Ethiopia, Lucian, Motown Records, Love Records, and Universal Music Group aided, abetted, and profited off of Sean Combs' RICO enterprise. Mr. Jones recalls seeing defendant Lucian visiting Mr. Combs' home in Miami, Florida, and Los Angeles, California. According to Mr. Jones, whenever defendant Lucian visited Mr. Combs at his homes, it would be in the evening, and he and Mr. Combs would disappear for hours in Mr. Combs' bedroom. Defendant Lucian sponsored and attended several Love album listening parties at Mr. Combs' home in Los Angeles, California. These parties were sponsored by defendants MR, LR, and UMG. As evidence, these parties had sex workers and underage girls present. During these parties, defendant Lucian knew or should have known that Mr. Combs was drugging the attendees through laced bottles of De Leon tequila and Ciroc vodka. It is no secret that Mr. Combs had specific bottles of alcohol designated for females and other bottles designated for his staff, his artists, and himself. This fact was detailed by former artists and bodyguards of Mr. Combs. As a sponsor of these events, Defendant Lucian had a duty and obligation to ensure that sex workers and underage girls were not present and that Mr. Combs was not spiking the alcohol with date rape drugs. On YouTube channel, The Art of Dialogue, former bodyguard Gene Dill exposed Mr. Combs' pill mixing method used to spike cranberry juice and orange juice. According to Mr. Dill, Mr. Combs would place ecstasy and other date rape drugs in the juices. On YouTube, The Art of Dialogue, former artist Mark Curry exposed Mr. Combs spiking bottles of Moet champagne in the VIP section of nightclubs. Mr. Combs would have a set of Moet champagne bottles for his artists and a set for women. The writer of this court document has spoken with several former employees of Mr. Combs who witnessed defendant Christina instruct her staff to lace champagne de Leon and Ciroc liquor bottles with ecstasy and other illicit drugs. Mr. Jones recalls seeing defendant Ethiopia visiting Mr. Combs' home in Miami, Florida, and Los Angeles, California. According to Mr. Jones, whenever defendant Ethiopia visited Mr. Combs at his homes, it would be in the evening, and she and Mr. Combs would disappear for hours in Mr. Combs' bedroom. According to Mr. Jones, defendant Ethiopia visited Mr. Combs at defendant's CRS during Mr. Combs' writing camp. Defendant Ethiopia sponsored and attended several Love album listening parties at Mr. Combs' home in Los Angeles, California. These parties were sponsored by defendants MR, LR, and UMG. During these parties, defendant Ethiopia knew or should have known that Mr. Combs was drugging the attendees through lace bottles of De Leon tequila and Ciroc vodka. As a sponsor of these events, defendant Ethiopia had a duty and obligation to ensure that sex workers and underage girls were not present, and that Mr. Combs was not spiking the alcohol with date rape drugs. We're not done yet. You thought we were done? No. Stay tuned for part 2. Did you know that Daphne Joy was in these court records? Daphne Joy, 50 Cent baby mama, the one that he seems to like a little bit more. Yeah, she's in here mentioning something about like being an escort or a whore or something in Young Miami. We ain't even got into full details about Young Miami and everyone else that's mentioned in this lawsuit. Stay tuned for part 2. We're going to get into the details. I would like to know how you all feel about this situation, and while you are letting me know, could you please like and share this video and subscribe to Genevas Closet if you haven't already done so right here on YouTube. And you can follow me on Facebook at Genevas Closet. And you can email me at genevascloset22@gmail.com. You all have a fabulous day, and I will talk to you later. Bye.